What's up, everyone? Welcome back to another episode of Woke as Fuck. This is your host, Maximilian Webster, and I am so excited to have you here. If you're here listening, that means you are here for some positive inspiration. You're looking to tap into your spirituality, you're interested in self care, personal development, and conscious conversations around things that truly matter. So kick back, relax, and I hope you enjoyed today's episode.
I am so excited to be sharing my friend Lauren Elizabeth with you today. Lauren is a justice informed business coach, an ethics consultant. She works with online business owners who are ready and committed to bring their work into deeper alignment with their values. So, Lauren, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be here and to be having this conversation with you today.
Please tell me about yourself and a little bit from where you're from.
I guess I'll start with where I'm from. I was born and raised, and I am currently residing in Sonoma County, which is the unceded Pomo territory, the unceded lands of the Pomo Nation. And I just name that quickly because as a European descended woman, I think it's important for me to acknowledge that I live on stolen land. And so that's kind of a part of just my introduction of myself is that, I'm here and grateful and honoring the land that I'm on and acknowledging that there were people who were here before me. That's a really important part of my work is just, acknowledging the complexities of being human in a world that is run by capitalization and corporate culture and colonization. I also just want to let everyone know my pronouns are she, her, hers. Growing up in Sonoma County has been such a blessing, and I feel so lucky to be able to call this land home. It's like I often think of home as being like golden hills and oak trees. I'm from the neighborhood that I grew up in. It was just like a really tight-knit community, and it still is today. And I just feel so grateful to have experience in like organizing community, even if it's just like block parties and holiday gatherings. And it just is such a blessing and has really translated into my work of like building community and making sure that our people have what they need, and not always putting our own needs before everybody else's. Because I do believe that, and I think we'll probably get into this, but I really center interdependence as one of my core values. And so I do just feel very lucky to have grown up in a neighborhood and in a community that really centers our connectedness. That's where I come from.
Awesome.
Community and community in Sonoma County.
I love that. That's so beautiful. First of all, thank you for sharing that background. And I love how just right off the bat, we just got deep, we got woke as fuck. You're like, I'm living on stolen land. And that just brings me back to when I was living in Hawaii. It was like it wasn't like a taboo thing to say like, oh yeah, we're on stolen land. It's so important that we start talking about these things and like bringing it to the surface. And I love you're the only person I've talked to in my life that's, when I've asked them that question, has brought that up. So already super grateful for you sharing your light, sharing your wisdom today. So let's hop right into the interview. So what made you passionate about justice informed business originally?
Yeah, that is a loaded question. So I would say from a very young age, like I was asking questions about like why things are the way that they are. I quickly sort of established that Christian practices weren't for me when like I was asking questions like, well, how do we know God is real? And like, how do we know that like we're the chosen ones and all these things? Not getting answers. And then sort of similarly in school, I would have these experiences of, my history teachers teaching us American history or global history, and really asking like, well, why are we not learning about this? Or like, how come we just swept over Bacon's Rebellion, or these other like really important moments in history.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was always curious about like, what is the larger story here? What are we not being told? And that really brought me to sort of Eastern spirituality and really these like larger questions of how we're all connected. And so I guess when I really started asking these questions was in university. I studied Eastern philosophy and feminist ethics. And that was kind of the first time that I was really able to get like academic information that spoke to these pieces of society that I felt were missing from my own experience. And that really started, and I went to school in San Francisco, so I was in a very diverse, very liberal city, and the campus is like San Francisco State is still one of the most diverse campuses in the US. And so I was exposed to a lot of different people and cultures and, movements from, when I was 18, I was kind of being exposed to all of this, both in the classroom and on campus.
But you love that.
It was awesome. I feel so grateful to have received education in San Francisco. What a privilege. But then sort of when I graduated, so I had my degree is in philosophy and religion with a focus in feminist ethics and specifically Islamic philosophy. And I wanted to, it was pretty clear quickly that I wasn't going to find like a 9-to-5 job that allowed me to use those skills. And so I pretty quickly started exploring what it would look like for me to have my own business and how I can use the wisdom that I've acquired in school to make an impact in people's lives. And then I guess in 2014, I started my online business. I started coaching. Specifically then I was working with women and helping them bring their lives into alignment with their cycles, with their both menstrual cycles and just like physical energy cycles. And as I started putting myself out there in the online business space, I started to see these like patterns of like really harmful behaviors and very anti-feminist behaviors, even in the feminine empowerment movement.
Wow.
And so I was just like asking these questions of like, can we do this work in integrity? Is there a difference between like being in integrity and being in business? We often hear this sort of phrase like, oh, it's just business, or like, that's just how it goes in business. And I was really asking myself, like, can I be in business and be in integrity? And for a long time, the answer was just like, I don't know. I don't know if I can do that. And then in 2018, I started working with, I guess it was 2018. Yeah, I started working with this woman, Kelly Elizabeth, who basically she is also a white woman and has trained in Reiki, but she was trying to hold the complexity of like, how do I honor my own ancestral lineage with this powerful practice that's outside of my ancestral culture? And she was teaching us these ideas of like decolonizing spirituality from a white woman's perspective.
Wow.
And that really got me asking these questions on a larger scale of like, what are the systems that are in place that are preventing us from being in business and integrity? And how can I shift those systems? And so at the end of 2018, I participated in a certification program called Energetic Justice, which is a training on really how colonization and whiteness have impacted all of us, not just white folks, but all people, and how to start like unpacking that so that I can be doing this work in integrity. And that was just a major catalyst for me to, really tune into the things that I hadn't been seeing, right? I felt like for myself personally, I always saw things that people weren't seeing. And then all of a sudden in 2018, my eyes like opened to this whole underbelly that I hadn't even been seeing. And that's really, the last 2 years have been just a lot of unpacking what it looks like to be a white woman in spiritual spaces, trying to be in integrity, while also making an income. And yeah, it's been a journey and lots of challenges, but I think I answered the question.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. I love talking to you. I love listening to you speak as well.
Oh, thank
At
you.
first, I always just want to pick up a book after hearing you talk, but it also just like the way you express yourself is so eloquent. But what I really got out of that is, finding your own way within business. And when you were going into business, you notice that, hey, like there's some things around here that I'm not agreeing with. So I really commend you for the courage that it took to kind of, maybe you're still flipping the stones over, so to speak, but unturning every stone and looking at things from different angles. It takes a lot out of a person, and especially to go against the status quo and so to speak, for this country and a lot of that normative behavior that's going on in the world. It's like you're almost creating a new culture just by you exploring it and talking about it, and that's what I'm really excited about. So when it comes to, I just had another question that wasn't on the script, but oh yeah, what is integrity in business looked to you? I know we were going to talk about competition and collaboration, but some people hear the word integrity thrown around all the time. I say it all the time too, but maybe we don't have like a working functioning definition that we all agree upon. So what does it mean to you?
Yeah, I love that question. When I think of the word integrity, I think of like a piece of fabric. And I think of how, like, in order for a piece of fabric to be to have its integrity, right, its strength, it needs to be woven in a certain way. And so if I'm thinking about the way that I show up, if I'm trying to be in integrity, I need to be intentional and deliberate about the way that I'm showing up in the world. And really, I talk a lot about like ethical business and being in business and in integrity. And what I'm talking about is creating a system for yourself that really aligns with your values, right? Like what matters to you, what is important to you, and can you show up in a way that is in alignment with that? Can you create a business in a way that is in alignment with that? And then for me, I just want to just say really quickly, like everyone's ethics are going to be different. So when I say building an ethical business, that's going to look a little bit different for everybody.
Yeah, for everyone.
But for me, kind of the underlying factor is this idea of elevating the people and the planet as a priority in addition to profits and power. And unfortunately, I think we see in capitalism, which is sort of or I should say unfettered capitalism, toxic capitalism, which is a result of colonization, we see this sort of priority falling all around profits and like power towards like just the very small few.
Yeah.
And for me, like building an ethical business is about redistributing those profits and redistributing the power so that more people have access to everything that they need, not only to survive, but to thrive. I think if we're building a business that only focuses on ourselves and that only focuses on our personal power and our personal profit, to me, that doesn't feel like we're in integrity, because this idea of independence, this idea of being, somehow separate from like our competition, right? We see ourselves as being separate from them. It's easy to think like, oh, I need to accumulate it all for myself. But I don't see that as our reality. We are not separate. Exactly. And so in order to be in integrity, I think that we need to be building strong connections between people who are in our industry, be aware of how our work is impacting our community and the collective. That's what integrity means, is like being in a strong connection with what is around you. For me, that's kind of my working definition.
Yeah, definitely agree with that 100%. And I think that's the perfect segue into the next point about collaboration and competition. When I think of it moving more towards collaboration as opposed to competition, for me really involved shifting from a scarcity mindset to a more of an abundance mindset, because obviously if you're thinking like, oh, I need to do what I can to get all this for me and my family, there's going to be that feeling of like, I don't know, like, how do you put this into words? Yeah, it's just a different energy altogether, you know, as opposed to thinking of how can I work together with my neighbors, how can I work together with other people that are in my industry in order to make sure that we're all thriving and we're all seeing profits and we're all seeing power in a way that's not like infringing on other people's rights or infringing on their safety or their yeah.
Yeah, no, I 100% agree with that. Something that I often sit with is that scarcity is like an ancestral, it's like a piece of our ancestral lineage, is that like most of us, our ancestors, depending on, you know, obviously there are varying time frames for folks, but most of our ancestors, if you go back far enough, were truly trying to survive. Like
Yeah.
you go back far enough and like survival was like the key thing for humans. And so I kind of see how competition is like a part of our, it's like an ancestral response to fearing that you don't have enough. But, you know, even people who have everything that they could ever need for 5 generations, right? We look at these like, you know, super wealthy elite folks, they have everything they need for themselves and for the next generation and for the next generation even. And they still feel like they need more.
Yeah.
And so I have a slightly different opinion about competition versus collaboration than maybe some folks. I think there is such a thing as healthy competition. There's this idea of like, okay, this person's doing something and like that challenges me to, you know, do my work in this way. And maybe I'm not competing with them, but I think there is value in saying like, oh, this person's doing things differently than me, or even doing things similarly to the way that I'm doing them. And what can I learn from that? What can I, how can I use that information to motivate me to do better work, right? I think if you think about sort of nature, right, everybody's, you know, I think of like a forest, right? And like the tallest trees get the most sunshine or get the most, you know, getting the most rain. And the trees that are lower in the canopy have to kind of like compete with one another for
those resources.
And that really motivates diversity and expansion and all of that. So I think that there is such a thing as healthy competition. And also the forest, we don't think of like each tree in a forest as like separate from the forest, right? It's its own thing, and it's a part of this like larger ecosystem.
Beautiful.
And so I feel like if we think of competition as more of just like this concept, this idea that allows us to diversify and make sure that we are really coming from our own place as a piece of a larger collective, it can be healthy. That being said, I am all about collaboration. I think that that's where like some of this really potent magic comes from, is from different communities coming together and weaving what they know with what these people have to offer. And, you know, I going back to this idea of interdependence, like we are a social species, we are a global ecosystem. We were not meant to do this work alone.
Yeah, that's so important. Just going back to, you know, what you're saying about the ancestors and scarcity, it's like that was taught from generation to generation to generation, like that we need to do what we can to protect our own, to survive. And we're coming to a place now. I mean, it's just so exciting having this conversation, you know, being at the front lines of changing these systems and looking at things in a new way. It's like we have the opportunity to try things in a new way. And so with that being said, how can you see us changing our systems to be more just?
Yeah, that's the question. I wish I had a really succinct answer that I could just like drop on you right now.
Yeah, it's kind of a general question too. So.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. I think that with that question, we need to just be open to more questions, right? What does justice mean, right? How how can we live that for ourselves, and how can that expand into our businesses, and then like we were saying, like into the culture. I really do believe that business is a catalyst for culture. We look at how you know, plastic bags is like the example that I always think about, or just like single-use plastic. The people started to say like, wait, I don't want all this plastic. And so these small businesses, I think of like the co-ops back in the early 2000s and in the 90s saying like, no plastic bags, like bring your canvas tote and like we'll put our veggies in there. And we've slowly seen that change to where now the whole world is like waking up to the harms of plastic. And unfortunately, like certain communities, that's all they have, right? Is like this kind of trickle down of plastic has kind of gotten all over the world, but we're starting to see communities wake up to how harmful this is. And so business as a culture catalyst has spread the awareness of like, oh, maybe we shouldn't be using these single-use plastics. And we're seeing businesses step up to create this as a part of the collective culture. And I think, you know, if we think about just like specifically in like the coaching healing space, each of us is making an impact with our work on our clients and on our audience. And just this conversation right now, we're talking about ideas that maybe aren't talked about in the general space. And so by talking about these ideas of what is justice, what is liberation, what does it mean to be free of the harmful pieces of capitalism, and by living that in our business, we are making this impact on the culture and really asking people to sit with these questions themselves. You know, it's been like it's hard, specifically as, I mean, justice is a huge topic, but like as a white woman, it's been a really hard thing for me to come to admit that like I've been complicit, even though I'm not a bigoted racist, I've been complicit in oppressing people because I benefit from the current system. And so what does it look like for me to maybe leverage my privilege or maybe give up some of my privilege so that other people have a chance and have access to the things that I've been sort of gifted by society?
Yeah, that's so powerful. I think of that a lot when it just comes to, you know, how easy it is for me to just hop on the internet and take an e-course and then, you know, go around and charge money for, you know, teaching what I just learned. It's like other people in other countries don't have that same privilege. So how can I, as a business owner and as an entrepreneur, try to share my resources, share my education so that I can ultimately share what I've been privileged enough to receive with other people who are less fortunate. I just think that's an amazing way to look at both personal and cultural transformation. And that was kind of like our last topic, was going into the impact of this work being in the future. And it just makes me so hopeful, puts such a big smile on my face thinking of the plastic bags back in the 2000s and where we are now. It's like, where do you see in the next 20 years?
Yeah. So my whole life I've been like a real idealist, like really holding the hopeful visions.
Samesies.
And I'm so grateful for that skill to be able to see the positive and move towards that. And also a lot of the work that I've done to sort of excavate justice movements and the history that has gotten us where we are really has me concerned for the future. And I don't want to take things too dark, but I think that, you know, we are on the precipice of catastrophe across many systems. And, you know, when I talk with folks that I am in movement with, when I talk to you know, anti-racist elders and folks who have been fighting for environmental justice for, you know, since before I was born, the answer that they always give me is like, you have to start with yourself, right? We have to start living the life that we want to create, right? And that's kind of, you know, there's like this sort of thing with like law of attraction, which I kind of like resist the law of attraction stuff. But there's this idea of like, live your most abundant life now and abundance will follow you. And while there are some systematic problems with that because of the capitalist system that we live in, I think that when it comes to justice, when it comes to creating a more just world, we have to be living that now. Yeah. And it's, I wish I had a more solid answer for what the future could look like, but I do believe that we can redistribute wealth, we can redistribute power. And there is this like process of sort of, so this allegory came to me from Abraham, and his last name is escaping me right now, but he has a website called risksomething.org. And it's about like, how do we, like, what can we give up? What can we do to create a new world? We're going to have to risk something to create a new world. And he shares this allegory or this analogy of being on the Death Star and being born as, this sort of Death Star elite. And like, you're working on the Death Star and it's like, wow, I'm really like, my whole life is based on this system that goes against my values. So like, how do I move out of that when it's all I've ever known? And the sort of message in this is like, well, if we're on the inside, we can start slowly loosening screws, right? We don't have to jump ship right now. And in fact, that probably would be maybe not the most helpful thing to do, because like, our comrades are here and they're in the system right now. And for a lot of people, it's not an option to jump ship. There's this sort of movement to like, buy a bunch of property with your friends and start a commune and like get off grid. And like, that's wonderful for people who have access to that. And also there's a whole bunch of folks who can't just leave their 2 jobs and, move out to the country and start a farm. Like, it's just not a reality for everybody. And so for those of us who are able, I think we need to be thinking about like, how can I loosen the screws in this system? How can I make sure that my wealth and my power is being distributed to people who maybe have less wealth and less power than me, right? And so I guess just some like practical things is, we can pay tithes, we can donate a portion of our income to organizations that align with our values. So for example, I typically lead like a monthly workshop on one aspect of a justice-informed business. And when I teach that workshop, any proceeds, I donate like 10% to, I choose an organization and I donate 10% to that. Offering scholarships to folks who maybe are, experiencing financial injustice. There's ways that we can practically do this, but as like a mental concept, I love this idea of like being inside the Death Star and like loosening screws. And eventually we will have to jump ship. Eventually we will have to move into something new, but dismantling while we're creating, I think is really what is going to allow us to move into a more just future.
Wow. Thank you for those practical steps, and that paradigm shift, that mindset shift is so powerful as well. What I got out of that is it's going to require your almost like this sense of comfort that a lot of people have with how things are, and to align with a more just and more ethical, whatever that means to you, future. Then it's going to have to require some tough moments of like looking at yourself, looking at your privilege, looking at how you're contributing to the problem currently, and having to make that decision like, okay, it's like I'm going to either decide to go with the flow and just keep doing this, or like you said, start unscrewing those screws. And it sounds like it begins from within, as cliche as that sounds.
Well, I mean, yeah, it might be cliche, but it is totally true.
Fundamental.
Yeah, like we, something that has been a part of my journey with learning about justice movements is like really getting into the somatics of colonization and capitalism, and how much our actual physical bodies are impacted by the worlds that we live in. So like we know about epigenetics and ancestral trauma, and we know that trauma is stored in our bodies.
Yeah.
And so if we're not, embodiment has kind of become this like catchphrase, like, like get into your body, which is great. But we also have to be aware that like getting into your body isn't just about like feeling sexy and good in your body. It's about acknowledging how your body has been hacked by a system that isn't set up for you to succeed.
Oof.
And that can feel really tough. Like when I was first going through this process, I was literally having like my wisdom teeth, which I need to get those taken out. But my wisdom teeth were just like flaring up. My partner was having like horrible headaches and like issues with his scalp. And like, we were just like, our bodies were literally breaking down because we were extracting this like toxic programming. And that, I don't think we realize how much our bodies are impacted by the environment that we live in.
Yeah.
And so by starting with ourselves, right, and starting to extract that, and I also just like want to acknowledge that it's not like a one and done thing. Like this is a spiral. I'm continuing to do this work and probably will for my entire life.
Deeper and deeper.
Yeah, exactly. But I think that starting with ourselves and like kind of getting that gunk out of our body so that we can show up in alignment with our values is like that first step. And it's a long step. And I also want to say that like, you don't have to be done with decolonizing your own body and extracting yourself from capitalism before you start doing this work. I think that, capitalism has really trained us and conditioned us to like align with perfectionism and like wanting to be perfect and like show up like this polished, beautiful commercial version of ourselves. And I think that is what is preventing us from creating change, is this feeling like we have to be perfect before we do it. Imperfection is way more progressive than perfection.
Wow. Bravo. Oh my gosh, I could listen to you talk all day. I'm just like over here like, yes.
Oh, thanks, Max.
Yes.
I appreciate that.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom, sharing your insights. This is probably a podcast episode I'm going to have to listen to a couple of times and just listen for myself even. I got so much out of this, and I'm sure anyone listening has as well. How can the people get connected with you? Do you have any programs or offerings that you'd like to share?
Yeah, thank you so much. So I'm currently between like group offerings. I typically have like a group container going. So if you're interested in doing some group work with me, reach out and we can talk about that. I do have a Facebook group called Culture Catalysts, and that is just a community where we're talking about how our businesses and our healing practices can be a part of creating new culture, and that's on Facebook. You can connect with me on Instagram at lauren.elizabeth.coaching. And that's also my website is laurenelizabethcoaching.com, but that's under construction. But you can go there and sign up for my newsletter, and I send weekly emails on these topics as well. So
you're awesome. I gotta
thank you.
I'm on that list as well.
Thank you. Yeah. And really, I am like down to have these conversations with people. That's where it starts. It's like, how can we talk about these topics that we've been taught we're not supposed to talk about? And so I would love to just be in community with folks and grow this movement together. It's the only way we're going to get out is together.
Yes. Amen. Well, everyone, thank you so much for listening to another episode, and we will see you all next time.